Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot Kid, the Nerd Party's show that examines the work of Star Wars creators. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And this week we are going to be bringing you a look at Joss Whedon's wrap-up to the Firefly series, featuring Alan Tudyk, who is now beloved by Star Wars fans for portraying K2SO in Rogue One. Serenity, which came out. It was the compromise for having sort of screwed Firefly off the air from Fox. He was able to pick up the property and go and get Serenity made, which is sort of it's supposed to tie a bow on the series, as it were. It was constructed in such a way that they could have had sequels had it been successful. But they were, at the very least, it was a love letter to the fans and a thank you for having stuck with the show. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, what the movie's really all about. Mike, did you see this in the theater when it came out?
Yeah, in fact, I saw it like 3 months before it came out, because they did a thing where they had, since it was really sort of all about the fans, Firefly was a show that, lasted for 13 episodes on Fox before being canceled, despite having lots and lots of, very vocal fans. I guess there weren't a lot of people who watched the show. It was basically like a sci-fi Western, right? About a band of misfits who were on the losing side of a righteous war, and are now traveling the verse, trying to make ends meet and doing things which may not be 100% legal, but usually taking the moral high ground. And and this is sort of like the conclusion of that story in a sense. And since it was really all about the fans, and it was relying very heavily on, I think, internet buzz and stuff like that, they did a thing where in a number of cities across the country, in June, I think the movie came out in September, but in June of 2005, they had a thing where they did super duper early screenings of basically the almost finished version of the movie, and fans could go to that and bond with their fellow Browncoats. And and it was one of those things where I had the DVD sitting on the shelf. I watched the first couple episodes when they aired, and I never got around to the rest. And I had the DVD sitting on my shelf, ready to watch by September. And then I saw this thing online, and I was like, oh. So I bought tickets for it. And then I'm like, now I have a week to watch the show, or 2 weeks to watch the show. Yeah. And I watched the entire series in that time frame, and then went to see this special show. And they pulled out all the stops. They had a documentary crew there to get people's reactions to put on the DVD, and then they had a couple cast members there. I forget who the second person was, but Summer Glau was there at our screening.
Cool.
So that was cool, and we saw an almost finished version of the movie. And obviously, when you're with that crowd, the audience is definitely in favor of the movie and willing to cut it as much slack as need be, and all that stuff.
Yes.
Sold out and yeah. and it was a lot of fun. When I went back to see the finished film a couple months later, there were 3 other people in the theater, and I'm pretty sure they had never seen the show, and it played a little differently,
I think it probably fell a bit flat with them.
Maybe just a little bit, but for me, I definitely enjoyed it. I'm not your super duper fan where I don't have a bumper sticker or anything like that. I don't have the T-shirt with the curse your inevitable betrayal or whatever it is on it. That kind of thing.
I aim to misbehave.
Yes, I don't have any of that stuff, but I do really, really like the show, and I thought that the movie was a good conclusion to that show. But yeah, what about you? Did you see it in the theater?
I did not. The first time I saw it, a person who was a fan of the show, I was training to run the Marine Corps Marathon, actually, with my wife, and was invited over to see, have you ever seen Firefly? No. Oh, my gosh. Well, you got to see Serenity at least. Okay, sure. Hey, hon, you want to go do this? No, you go. All right, sure. And so I went and I watched it, and I had that sort of, I guess you could say, ambivalent reaction where I was like, yeah, I didn't dislike it, but okay. And it wasn't until many years later that after the birth of our second child, I was in a situation where I was up a lot at night. And so some friends, somehow we got on the topic, and they were like, wait, you've never seen Firefly? I was like, no. So they gave me their DVD set, and I watched it in like 5 days, primarily late at night, and fell in love with it. Just thought it was great. Then I went back to the movie right afterwards, and I was like, okay, yeah. With the exception of one thing, cool. All right, I get it. And I liked it as a little tie off to the series. Coming back to it this time, I had a different reaction that is already angered at least one host here on the Nerd Party Network. Two hosts, actually, on the Nerd Party Network.
All right. What was that?
I wrote a one-word, I guess, half a word review of it after seeing it this time.
Where?
On Letterboxd.
Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, which was, I got to be honest. Having distance with the show, and the thing is, I'm going to compare and contrast here. I was a huge Twin Peaks fan, diehard Twin Peaks fan. Even watched it while it sucked in the second season. Okay, and then once it started getting good back at the end of the second season, I was like, yeah. And then Fire Walk with Me came out, and back then, I wanted to burn every copy of that movie and send David Lynch to the moon. I was like, how dare you do this with my beloved franchise, good sir? Mm-hmm. Then the Blu-ray came out a little while back, and I said, you know what? I haven't rewatched the show in a while. I'm going to watch Fire Walk with Me on its own terms. I'm going to watch it just as a film. This is not tied to the show. And I watched it under those terms, and I had a decidedly different reaction where I went, wow, I've kind of misjudged this movie through time. It's pretty great. I enjoy it. This time, coming back to Serenity, not rewatching any of the show coming up to it, year since I've watched either. It was one of those things where I basically recognized it as, yeah, this is a love letter to the fans, but I can't give it high marks if looking at it with the eyes of I've never watched the show or I don't know what's necessarily going on. I didn't feel any spark of why I should care about the characters or what was going on with them. It just felt pretty much like a high-budget TV episode.
But should you need... I mean, I don't know. This is a case... Like, I know we talked a few weeks back on our other show, Stage 9, about Harry Potter and how a lot of people say, like, you need to watch... or you need to read the books in order to fully appreciate the movies. And I called BS on that because, you shouldn't need to read a book in order to appreciate an adaptation of that book in another
That is
form.
absolutely correct.
But in this particular case, I think that judging the movie outside of the context of the show is, well, in some ways valid because, people are going to, watch the movie without having seen the show. I feel like it's not really fair to the movie. You should be able to, judge this movie in the context of the series.
Well, let's lift it from TV to movie and say let's look at something like the Marvel universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? The good ones are the ones I can plunk down and I can sit down and I don't feel like I need to have seen anything else.
Well, I mean that's fair, but I mean, is that the case here? I mean, like, if you look at this in the context of the show, right? I mean, because you have seen all the other Marvel movies. And
no, I haven't actually.
Really? What haven't you seen?
The Dark World, I haven't
Okay.
seen Volume 2 of Guardians of the Galaxy yet. I didn't bother with Doctor Strange. I think there's one other one lurking out there.
Interesting. Well, watch those movies because they're good.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I'll get around to Dark World.
Hey.
You're the first person that I've heard use the adjective good in connection with it.
No, it's better than the first one. It's, by a guy who did like some Game of Thrones and some Sopranos and some Mad Men.
Well, look, okay. If I divorce Serenity from it, is it structurally flawed to the point where it's a bad movie where I'm like, don't go seeing that? No, it gives some backstory. You get some idea. But I think that the movie from beginning to finish struggles with whose story it is. Who does this movie belong to? Who does this arc belong to? Yes, I know it belongs to River, but it gets a little muddy going along the way. And, then is like, okay, we'll watch it in conjunction with the show and only watch it in that context. Well, then, spoiler alert, the death of Wash makes me nothing but blindingly angry because it's cheap. It's a wasted moment, and it's a waste of like everything. It's done just for like a cheap reaction.
Yeah, that does not work for me. I mean, for one thing, I don't want to see him die, which I guess is not really a fair thing to judge it on. But the reaction of everyone else involved, and I understand it's a high pressure situation and everything, but it does not play like it should. It really doesn't. And I do have a problem with that. And I guess that's why we're watching this movie, is because of Alan Tudyk and his performance.
Yeah. And he feels a little bit wasted in this.
Yeah, he does. And that scene doesn't really work, and through no fault of his, I mean, he plays it really well. But it also kind of like feels like a betrayal of that character. Maybe they were trying to kill like the character who you like the most or something. I don't know. But, because it's weird, because you always hear people complain about Wash getting killed. You never hear anyone complain about, Book getting killed, right?
But the thing is, if oh gosh, we got to go back. Oh no, look, they killed the preacher. Oh no. But it made sense because the villain was chasing them and he was protecting them. And so like in the context of the story, it's like, okay. And, if your point is like, oh, well, real life isn't like that. This isn't real life. Like it's not right to do that. So maybe I'm divorcing it from the show and coming at it from that way, because if I'm serious that the killing Wash the way that they did was cheap. And then sort of like the little cherry on top of that sundae is River goes in and does her big fight scene, and she doesn't even get so much as, like a broken nail from it. And I'm like, okay, look, it's sort of like she could at least get a scratch here.
Well, but I mean, they
basically turn her into
Superman,
Supergirl, whatever.
I mean, they established that she's, got
she
some
could at
skills.
least get a teeny. She should maybe need a Band-Aid.
Okay.
Afterward.
All right.
I think that would be fair, don't you?
I guess I didn't really have a problem with that.
And I also, this was the first movie I ever saw, and I'm going to butcher his name, Chiwetel Ejiofor.
I think it's Chiwetel Ejiofor, I believe.
You know what? I can't even say David
I can't say his name either, but
anyway, he's a good character and an interesting character, and I'm with it. And then watching it this time, and then at the end, it's like, and look, the Alliance did this terrible thing, and he's like, okay, I'll let you go. No,
yeah,
no,
that was
that character. Oh, look, the Alliance did these terrible things. Yeah, so that's not my. He should be like, it's a turn that doesn't ring true, because it should be maybe earlier. I don't know how to resolve it, but he comes across as a character like Tommy Lee Jones. I didn't kill my wife. I don't care. That's not what, that has nothing to do with me.
I don't know. I think like letting him live or whatever had more to do with Mal than it did with anything else because
Oh no, I'm talking about his sudden turn. It's like, okay, I'm gone.
like he just let
Yeah.
yeah.
He's
Yeah.
just like, whatever, I'm not going to kill all of you now.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing about this, I mean, this is the first time I've seen this movie since Avengers, since Joss Whedon became, the director of like the highest grossing movie since for whatever, and I think it's interesting to kind of like see this sort of like small like financial failure. I mean, this movie cost $40 million and it made $25 million at the box office,
Yeah.
which to me, I'm like not shocked by that because I mean, when I first heard like they're doing a feature film version of this show that got canceled after 13 episodes, I'm like, why do they think that's going to work? Not
Right.
with anything in terms of the quality or whatever. Like, I'm cool with that. I'm glad that they get to finish their story or whatever, but who's writing that check? That seems like a weird idea, I mean, and it was because it didn't make any money,
Yeah.
And I'm sure they've made their money back on home video and all that stuff. And I know, recently with Fox, being all about the revivals with the X-Files and 24 and Prison Break, someone asked Fox, like, would you consider doing Firefly again? And they're like, hell yeah, we would, but not without Joss Whedon. And Joss Whedon's like, I don't want to do Firefly anymore.
Yeah.
So, it's not going to happen anytime soon, most likely. And
No,
I can see
it's
that
not.
because, time and everything, and now you got nostalgia and TV is a different beast. But who thought that this movie was going to make money? That's so weird.
No, yeah, I mean that budget was not justified. It really wasn't, and I imagine that the budget was as quote unquote low as it was because of the heavy reliance on CG,
And
for
yeah,
everything.
and the everything was rather. I mean, it felt low budgety,
Yeah,
for sure. And I remember this being a thing because it was 2005, and because our friends are all a bunch of weirdos. Everyone, of course, is going to compare this to Revenge of the Sith, right? And I remember like having this conversation with a couple of my friends, and when they're like, "Oh, it's this movie. It is so much more believable. I was way more into like the action set pieces in this movie. It did such a better job than Revenge of the Sith did, and the visual effects looked better and everything." And I'm like, okay, guys, you know what? You can say that you like Serenity more than Revenge of the Sith. You can say it's a better written movie. You can say the performances are better. But if you start talking about action set pieces and visual effects and comparing the two of them, you sound like you don't know what you're talking about.
you're just being petty at that point.
Yes, but I think they're serviceable. I mean, I think that you have to work on that budget, in order to do this. But I mean, especially now that we've seen Joss Whedon do a million things and conquer the world and all that stuff, I definitely put this as sort of one of his lesser efforts. Is it better than Age of Ultron? I don't know. Maybe.
I have not rewatched Age of Ultron since the movie theater, which maybe speaks volumes about that.
Yeah.
Because I've never felt the impetus to. But I can tell you that the really only way I'm going to come back to Serenity again is after a Firefly rewatch.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I haven't watched it in all this time is because I almost feel like I'm not worthy of watching it, or maybe it's not worthy of a rewatch without, having watched the whole show prior, which is a weird thing because I don't feel that way about like the Star Trek movies.
I tend to accept and that's EXCEPT, the next generation movies from this, in a sense, but with the original series Trek movies and with Star Trek 09, and yes, even Into Darkness, regardless of what I think overall, there's no, like, I think somebody can come in cold to those and still get what's going on and still know what's going on with those. Like, there's no need to, and, Star Wars, too. I don't need to see, episode 3 before I see episode 4. I don't need to see even episode 4 before I see episode 5.
Wait, you don't need to see episode 3 before you see episode 4?
No.
Oh, no.
What?
Well, I would hope not, seeing as how it was made 28 years later.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't need to see episodes 1 through 6 before I see episode 7. I can come into episode 7 cold and get everything that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And Rogue One, yeah, even that holds up on its own.
Yeah.
And so I don't need the other movies to support it, as opposed to, like you're saying, Serenity, I feel like I got to watch the show before I can watch the movie.
I'm not sure about Rogue One, to be honest. I mean, I think we are living in this weird bubble where, I think it's a similar situation to me pointing at the zigzaggy carpet at the David Lynch Festival and saying, like, I don't know what that is, and you saying, how can you not know what that is? That sort of thing. Because I talked to someone who was not at all familiar with Star Wars, or just had like sort of a passing interest in Star Wars, and they were watching, Rogue One, and halfway through the movie they turned to the person who they were with and were like, I have no idea what's going on right now. I have no idea what's going on in this movie. My
own small sampling is that, like, my in-laws and other relatives who have a passing interest, they are aware of Star Wars, but if I started talking to them about any finer points of, episodes 1 through 7, they would look at me and be like, okay, that's your thing, John.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they plugged into Rogue One okay. The interesting thing about that, though, is I think I've created enough ripple effect in the pool of people around me that I've sort of accidentally included them a little bit in the bubble. So I don't think my sample size is untainted, as it were.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah. Rogue One is one that I go back and forth on about whether it can really function on its own. I say that it can, but sort of by a hair's breadth in a certain regard.
Mm-hmm.
Still, because I would have ended the movie about a minute earlier, but that's just me.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I mean, it's something that maybe we can experiment with at some time.
I think we should.
Yeah,
definitely. So, okay, so coming to the end of it here, we've said Tudyk was underutilized in this, very much so. Somebody comes up to you and they say, I want to watch Serenity. What do you say to them?
I say, that's a good movie. You should watch Serenity, but watch all of Firefly first.
And I would say, don't watch it until you've watched all of Firefly first.
Yeah. I think pretty much the same thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'll be more willing to revisit it more. I mean, watching it this time, I mean, I've only seen Firefly all the way through once, and that was 2005. And while I do have fonder memories of Firefly than I do of Serenity, I remembered enough of it to not feel like I needed to rewatch it in order to watch this. But I do think that while it's a good movie, it's not as good as the best or even the average that Firefly has to offer.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
It does.
And, it was cool seeing it on the big screen for sure. I mean, all that stuff was great, I mean, it was shot by the guy who shot Unforgiven and everything. And, all of that stuff was
movie
fantastic.
Looks fine.
Yeah, I mean, the photography is good and all that stuff. It was cool to see, a TV show on the big screen, but in a lot of ways it was just a TV show on the big screen. It's a weird thing. I wonder how it would have manifested itself as a revival today. Probably as like a miniseries on TV instead of an actual feature film.
Probably.
But Yeah, who knows? Who knows? I don't know. I do like it. I do think it is a good movie. And do I think it's the most amazing thing ever? No. But I mean, do I think that Firefly the show is the most amazing thing ever? No, but I think that it's very, very, very good, and I think that this is a satisfying conclusion because what we got was not really a satisfying conclusion
No,
to
God,
the original series.
No, no. The way the series went off was just not fair. But
Yeah.
that's the sort of the story of television over time.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something, and I want to get your take on this because Rebels was just announced that it's ending.
Yeah.
Right, and when I heard that, I was in the room. I was in the room with Dave Filoni when he said that. Right, like
Yeah.
my reaction was, "Oh, cool," and everyone else's reaction was like, "Oh man, that sucks." Right, and I think this is a weird thing. I mean, like. I'm not happy that it's ending, because like, oh, we're not going to get more of it, but I'm happy that it will be completed. You know what I mean? Like
Knowing, yes.
I almost wish that like television series would, start off and say like, this is season 1. It's going to end with season 5. And having that knowledge going into it, just so that there isn't this temptation to be like Clone Wars and say like, we're going to keep on going as long as we can, and then eventually we're going to get canceled, and then we're going to have to scramble, and then we're going to have to create a whole other show which we can use as a pretense to finish up all these storylines or
Really?
whatever.
Okay. Did you pull a hamstring running that far for a shot at Clone Wars? Did you?
This is that was not my intention.
Take a knee.
It was
and take a breath.
it was a stream of it's a domino effect. I did not mean to go down that road when I started on it, but I saw it and I just had to keep on going because it was so close and it was so obvious, and it is always that thing. But this is what I'm saying. Like, I almost like it when I hear that my favorite show is coming to an end because I know that there is going to be an end. Like, I like knowing that I'm not going to be, because at some point you're going to run into an X-Files scenario where it's like, how much longer are we supposed to stay with this thing? Because my patience is wearing thin,
Yeah,
And-
well, I mean, X-Files, that's a whole sordid mess in and of itself, for sure.
And I feel really bad because you see, like, on Twitter and stuff like that, where they're like, this show is canceled, and there's people who are like, people like in the industry and everything who are like, I hate it when a show is canceled. It's very sad and disappointing because it means that all these people are going to be losing their jobs. And it's like, yeah, that's the real world, scenario. But at the same time, in something like Rebels, right? It's like he said right there in the room, this isn't going to be the last animated series coming from Lucasfilm, I mean, I am fully expecting them to announce the next animated series before Rebels actually finishes. You know what I mean? Like,
I will say that I'm on board with you that it's better to give somebody the fair warning to let them know. I mean, we talked about over on Stage 9 Magnum PI.
Mm-hmm.
And Magnum PI got that. They wanted to cancel it like a year earlier, and they were like, you know what? We're going to give you one more season for the fans. You guys get to watch this. This is for you. And I think that, yes, there is a nice feel to it that they feel like they've just sort of figured their way. And so they're like, you know what? We can't keep this going forever. You've sort of figured out what you want. This is your last season. You've got your pieces in place that you want. Make it count. And I think that giving a creative team that notice of make it count, they'll make it count. I have full faith in Filoni as well, as you well know, that if you give him, he knows he only has so many episodes to go. He's going to be like, okay, we're cutting all of the fat and we're racing to the finish line here and we're going to get it done. I don't know how I specifically feel about giving it only X number of seasons at the outset. I think that there's a really nice feel to it. And I know that as sci-fi fans, we've all sort of been in love with the idea ever since Straczynski did that with Babylon 5, where he's like, this is going to be 5 seasons, then I'm done. And yeah, it puts a cap on it, and it doesn't allow things to spin out of control at any way. But who's to say what the right number of seasons are for a show?
I mean, if you have an ending, I mean, in the case of Clone Wars and Rebels, I mean, where these characters are going to go eventually, right? So you kind of have an idea, like Clone Wars has to take place over the span of 3 years. That's a pretty finite amount of time. Rebels, same deal. Like, theoretically, it's not going to go much past A New Hope. And I'm very curious to see, because, I mean, this was something which I thought of with, Clone Wars as soon as they introduced Ahsoka, where I'm like, how are they going to get from him training this girl to her not being there and him being happy-go-lucky in the first scene of episode 3. And they did it. They did a really good job, I think, of that, of getting rid of her without killing her, right? Because yes. I always thought, like, okay, she can't be there, so she's got to die, but at the same time, how do you kill her and not have that wreck Anakin? And, with Rebels, I mean, I didn't think about this when the show started. I don't know why, but, I mean, now they're really into it, like, they're going to have to kill some people off in that show. And I guess it's a scenario where, like, you can do it and you don't have to worry about the other characters being like, hey, but some people are going to have to die.
Well, I think that the best possible, and first off, we know that the Ghost appears in Rogue One,
yes.
So it's still around it.
And we know that Hera's still alive.
And we know that Chopper is.
Chopper makes it, yeah.
So I think that the best possible end, they don't have to kill everyone.
Okay, I would but at some point, how many Jedi are out there where it's like, you're the last Jedi, except for those other 17 guys. You know what I mean?
The truth has always been a fungible thing with Yoda and Obi-Wan. But so long as they're dead by Return of the Jedi, so that Yoda can say, the last Jedi will you be, that counts. They can make it to Star Wars because Obi-Wan says in Star Wars, now the Jedi are all but extinct, which was the wiggle room to introduce Yoda in the next one. That sort of thing. So long as they're gone by Return of the Jedi, I think it counts. But at the same time, I think that the best way to get, because I don't think they're going to do anything as grim as like watching people get cut down sort of thing. I think it would be great if they had something where they send Hera and Chopper and maybe one or two other people off, and then, the remaining people, they go on this crazy run to do something, blow something up, or go into a nebula, or trigger some chain reaction, or lead them off, and the show ends with them, and it's up to you to decide whether they're dead or not. So if you come into it, and you come into it with the philosophy of all of these people have to be dead, the show ends, and you're like, well, obviously they died right after that shot. And then if you don't want them dead, you can say to yourself, no, they ran off and they got past everybody, and they, like it becomes like a Rorschach test. And that's the type of thing that I want, I think, just because I'm the type of fan that likes debating that type of thing. No, I am.
No,
like, what does it mean? How does it go?
No, that's true. That's the type of thing where, like, anytime someone's like, is Boba Fett alive or dead? I'm like,
no. See, I'm not talking about constructing it where they get eaten by something, and then I'm like, no, I didn't see him dissolve. I'm talking about like something that's specifically constructed to leave the question open.
Okay, yeah, I mean fans. That's fine. It's fine. All that means to me, and I agree with you under normal circumstances, but under Star Wars circumstances, all that means to me is they're just waiting for someone to write a tie-in novel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that gets into a whole other conversation. But what's interesting, and I always love to throw the glaring spotlight on stuff like this, what did we stop talking about? Serenity. So yeah. I think that in and of itself is a very big indication of overall opinion. Now, I have already received some hate mail of a sort for my opinion on Serenity. If you want to reach out to the show, go to thenerdparty.com/contact. You can look up Great Shot Kid and vent all of your hatred about not praising everything Browncoat here today. You can also reach out to us on Twitter, at Join Nerd Party on Twitter. You can reach out to us on Facebook. We post all of the shows and we post other news tidbits. You can interact with us at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. Now, Mike, that's where they can reach the show and the network. Where can they find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me on TalkFilmSociety.com doing a show called Soderbergh 2828, where we look at all of Steven Soderbergh's movies, and you can find me on CommentaryTrackStars.com doing a show called Commentary Track Stars, where we do whatever we want. And we've got, well, I won't say what we've got coming up, but yeah, anyway. And
I'm looking forward to it.
You can also find me on Trek.fm doing a show called Stage 9, where we look at the people who make Star Trek with John.
Me, yes. Stage 9 over on Trek FM, where we do. It's a lot of fun. We just looked at Any Given Sunday, starring Al Pacino. And here on the network, I'm also co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations with Matt Rushing, where we debate things like whether Boba Fett's still alive. And I also co-host Words with Nerds, which, much like Commentary Track Stars, whatever comes into our brains is typically what we're saying. So that's a lot of fun. I co-host that with my pal Craig. And if you want to find me online, look for Kessel Junkie. He's a little bit shy still, but he'll interact with you. So anyway, thank you for joining us with, for looking at Serenity. Sorry if I've angered you too much. Join us next week when we continue to look at the works of actors who have been in Rogue One, when we look at Zhang Wen's Let the Bullets Fly.